Something happens to a man around his mid-40s that the people around him almost universally misread. He starts questioning things he never questioned before. The career he built carefully over 2 decades suddenly feels hollow in ways he can't fully articulate. The life he constructed, the house, the routine, the role he plays in every relationship, starts to feel like a costume he's been wearing so long he forgot it wasn't his actual skin. He might buy something impractical, pursue something that looks from the outside like he's lost his mind, pull back from obligations that consumed him for years without producing whatever it was he thought they were producing, start conversations about changing direction that alarm everyone around him. And the people in his life, his wife, his children, his colleagues, his friends, look at him with a mixture of concern and judgment and reach for the most available explanation. Midlife crisis. He's going through something. He'll come out the other side, just wait for it to pass. But here's what they're missing. And here's what he himself often misses, which is the more costly confusion. This is not a crisis. A crisis is something going wrong, something breaking that was working, something failing that should be succeeding. What's happening to this man is the opposite of that. Something is finally going right. Something that has been suppressed for 30 years is finally pushing through the surface with enough force that it can no longer be ignored. This is a reckoning. And reckonings, however uncomfortable they appear from the outside, are among the healthiest things that can happen to a human being. This is Mr. Eugene, and today we're talking about what actually happens to men in midlife. Not the cultural caricature of the sports car and the younger woman, the real psychological and existential shift that produces those surface behaviors. Why it happens to the men it happens to. What it's actually telling a man about his life. And why understanding it clearly is the difference between using it as a doorway to something genuinely better and letting it destroy what could have been saved. Let me start with something that goes almost completely unexamined in every conversation about midlife crisis. The profile of the man it happens to, because it doesn't happen to every man. It happens with much greater frequency and intensity to a specific type of man. And understanding who that man is reveals everything about what's actually driving the phenomenon. The man who has a significant midlife reckoning is almost always a man who has spent his entire adult life being extraordinarily good at one particular thing, showing up for others. From the time he was old enough to understand responsibility, he was oriented outward, making his parents proud, meeting his teachers' expectations, being the reliable, hard-working employee his company needed, being the provider his wife and children depended on, being the steady, responsible person his social circle could count on. This isn't a character flaw. These are genuine virtues. The willingness to carry responsibility, to subordinate your immediate desires to the needs of others, to show up consistently, regardless of what it costs you personally, these things produce real value for the people around you and real results in the world. But here is what this man traded for those virtues, often without ever consciously choosing the trade. He traded regular, honest contact with the question of what he himself actually wanted from his life. Not what was expected of him, not what made sense given his responsibilities, not what the next logical step in the path everyone agreed he was on looked like. What he specifically, as an individual human being with his own interior life, his own desires, his own sense of what a meaningful existence feels like, actually wanted. That question got deferred, then deferred again, then so consistently deferred that it eventually stopped feeling like a relevant question at all. He was a responsible man. Responsible men didn't ask what about me. They asked what's needed and delivered it. And for 20 or 25 years, this arrangement worked, or appeared to work. The external markers of success accumulated. Career advancement, financial stability, family, social standing. Everything that was supposed to constitute a good life, by the standards he inherited and never examined, was present. But something else was happening underneath all of that accumulation. Something quiet and slow and invisible until it wasn't. He was disappearing, not dramatically, not obviously, but genuinely. The interior life of the man, his authentic desires, preferences, the things he would have pursued if purely his own life were the consideration, were slowly going unexercised. Like a muscle that doesn't atrophy dramatically in a week or a month, but loses significant capacity across years of complete disuse. And then something happens, usually around his early to mid-40s. Something that cracks the surface of the arrangement he's been living inside without examining. Sometimes it's the death of a parent. The person who was always there, always the generation ahead of him, is suddenly gone. And with them gone, something shifts in how he understands his own position in the order of things. He's next. Not immediately, not necessarily soon, but next. The buffer between him and mortality has been removed. Sometimes it's a health scare of his own, a diagnosis, a serious symptom, something that makes the abstract reality of limited time suddenly and viscerally concrete. Sometimes it's simply an accumulation reaching a tipping point. The 30th year of doing what's expected, the 1,000th morning of living inside a life that was designed around other people's needs. A quiet moment, unremarkable from the outside, where he looks at what surrounds him and asks, with genuine bewilderment, "How did I get here, and is this actually mine?" Whatever the trigger, what follows is the reckoning, the delayed but completely legitimate arrival of the question he should have been allowed to ask, and should have been asking himself all along. What do I actually want from whatever time I have left? And here is where the understanding of this moment becomes absolutely critical. Because the answer to that question, when it arrives after 30 years of being suppressed, does not arrive with the measured, sophisticated, proportionate quality of a man who has been regularly in contact with his own desires. It arrives with the explosive, urgent, sometimes chaotic energy of something that has been compressed for decades finally finding release. It arrives without the refinement that comes from regular practice, without the calibration that comes from someone who has been allowing himself to want things consistently and learning through experience how to pursue those wants in ways that are proportionate and constructive. It arrives like the desires of the 20-year-old he was when he last allowed himself to really want things freely, because that's essentially where his interior development in this domain stopped. Not because he lacked intelligence or maturity in every other area, but because in this particular area, the area of conscious, unapologetic self-consideration, he stopped practicing the moment responsibility arrived and never resumed. This is why the external expressions of this reckoning often look adolescent to the people observing them. The sports car, the sudden obsession with an activity that looks frivolous, the pursuit of something that seems to belong to a younger man's life, the restlessness that doesn't fit the established, successful, responsible person everyone knows. These aren't signs of a breakdown. They're signs of a man trying to access a part of himself that's been dormant for 30 years and finding that the access feels clumsy and unrefined because it is. He hasn't practiced. He's reaching back to the last time he was genuinely in contact with his own desires and pulling forward what he finds there. The tragedy is not the reckoning itself. The reckoning is healthy. The tragedy is the 30 years of suppression that made it necessary in the form it arrives. A man who had been regularly, honestly asking himself what he wanted throughout his adult life doesn't arrive at 45 with this kind of compressed, explosive urgency. He's been making small adjustments all along, allowing himself to pursue things that matter to him, building a life that contains his actual desires rather than just his responsibilities. He's practiced the balance. So when mortality arrives as a felt reality rather than an abstract concept, he doesn't have 3 decades of deferred living to suddenly account for. He just continues living, perhaps with more intentionality and urgency, but without the whiplash of someone who just woke up inside a life he doesn't recognize as his own. This is the distinction that matters most for men who are either approaching this stage or currently living inside it. The reckoning is not the problem. The reckoning is the solution arriving late. The problem was the arrangement that made the reckoning necessary. The 30 years of living entirely by other people's yardsticks without maintaining honest connection to your own. So what does a man actually do with this understanding? If you're in your 30s and you recognize yourself in the pattern I've described, the man who shows up entirely for others while consistently deferring his own desires, the most valuable thing you can do is stop waiting for permission to ask what you want. Not by abandoning your responsibilities, not by becoming indifferent to the people who depend on you, but by beginning to practice regularly and honestly the question of what you want alongside the question of what's needed. These two questions are not as incompatible as the arrangement you've been living inside suggests. A man can be genuinely responsible and genuinely self-aware about his own desires simultaneously. The balance is not always easy, but it's achievable, and it's infinitely better than the alternative of deferring one question entirely until it explodes through the surface of your life at 45 with 30 years of pressure behind it. The small things matter here. Not the grand gestures, but the daily practice. Allowing yourself to pursue something you genuinely enjoy without justifying it as productive. Making a decision occasionally that prioritizes what you want without running it through the filter of what everyone else needs from you. Saying no sometimes to things that drain you without replacing the no with an apology or an elaborate explanation. These small practices keep the interior life alive, keep you in regular contact with who you are underneath the role, prevent the complete disconnection between self and life that produces the reckoning when mortality finally makes it undeniable. If you're already in the middle of this reckoning, already in the disorienting experience of questioning everything that seemed settled, here is what's worth holding on to. The questioning itself is healthy. The discomfort you're feeling is not evidence that something is wrong with you. It's evidence that something has finally reached the surface that needed to reach the surface. That the part of you that has a right to be included in the construction of your own life is insisting on that right. The question is not whether to listen to it. The question is how to integrate what it's telling you without destroying what was genuinely worth building in the process. Because not everything in the life you constructed deserves to be dismantled. Some of it was built on genuine values and genuine love and genuine commitment that still holds. The work of the reckoning is discernment, separating what you built because you genuinely chose it from what you maintain because it was expected, separating what still serves who you actually are from what you outgrew without noticing. That discernment is not easy. It requires more honesty than most men have been practicing. It will produce conversations that are difficult. It will require others to adjust to a version of you that is more present, more self-aware, and more willing to include your own desires in the equation than the version they've been living with. Some of the people in your life will welcome that version, the ones who wanted you whole rather than just functional. Others will resist it, particularly the ones who benefited most from the arrangement where your desires were permanently last on the list. Both responses tell you something important about what you're actually dealing with in those relationships. Here is what nobody tells men about this moment clearly enough. You are not required to choose between your responsibilities and your interior life. You are not required to blow everything up to finally include yourself in the construction of your own existence. And you are not required to suppress what's rising in you for another decade in service of everyone else's comfort with the version of you they've grown accustomed to. What's being asked of you at this stage is not rebellion, it's integration. The integration of the man you've been, responsible, reliable, capable, with the man you actually are underneath all of that. The one with desires and preferences and a sense of what a meaningful life actually feels like, that has been waiting patiently for 30 years to be included in the conversation. That integration is not a crisis. It's the most important work of the second half of a man's life. And the men who do it well, who bring honesty and discernment to what's rising rather than either suppressing it again or detonating everything in its name, those men tend to emerge from this stage into the most genuinely satisfying period of their lives. Not because everything external improved dramatically, because for the first time in decades, the life they're living actually contains them. Men, are you living a life that actually contains you? Or are you living a life you built for everyone else while deferring the question of what you yourself actually want? Subscribe for the honest conversations that help good men understand what's happening to them before it takes everything to make them finally look.